Hello, hello, and welcome to episode number 196. Can't believe it's almost 200 episodes. That's pretty wild. Anyway, in this episode, we're going to be exploring we're going to be exploring Tetragon and talking about the difference between Tetragon and a lot of the other products that we work on in the open source community, with Cilium and Tetragon being kind of the two that I usually spend a lot of my time on in these episodes. So we're going to be exploring Tetragon and also exploring the fact that Tetragon doesn't have a requirement that there is a Kubernetes cluster. You can just run Tetragon on Linux servers. I feel like that's pretty cool and definitely worth something worth exploring. So today we're going to jump into that. I am pulling up the comments. With me here. Some kind of weird thing happening. All right, well, if you're out there, say hello, say where you're from. I am coming to you live from beautiful, sunny, kind of slightly foggy San Francisco. That's the Bay Area right behind us there. And I managed to get a pretty good room for the broadcast here in the San Francisco building, which is pretty much right next door to the Chase Center here in San Francisco. I've been trying to work more often from work, and this is the spot that I'm working from. It's pretty, I mean, not this particular spot. I just work on one of the tables on the other side here. But this is a pretty nice conference room. So I figured I would make use of it and host this thing here. So cool. Let me get things brought up here, and we will jump into the usual setup here. Send this to the big screen. All right, so let's check out the news for the week. This is, I think, probably one of my favorite news of the week's one, because there's just a bunch of good stuff in here, including this first preamble, which I think is really key to just, understanding a little bit of history around Cilium and a lot of the great stuff in this project. The way it starts off is Bill kind of writing a thing that says, 5 years ago when Google chose Cilium as a networking data plane for GKE, it was a massive milestone for the community, which is true. I remember that happening, and that was a pretty big deal. Google lays out all of the features that Cilium enabled in their 10-year networking review, which is a thing that you can read if you're interested in it. But basically it can be summed up as Cilium represented a significant leap in GKE's CNI capabilities. And since then, Cilium has become the standard in Kubernetes networking and security across all the different clouds, right? And there's some great evidence here that really kind of describes this, including some of the work that we've recently been doing to enable Cilium to be one of the first distribution, and currently the only distribution, that supports all of the different across the entire Red Hat ecosystem. So network performance, OpenShift virtualization, OpenShift service mesh, OpenShift hosted control planes, all of that is supported by Cilium, by Isobil and Cilium Enterprise, which is really exciting. And then we get into the technical. Oh, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but if you are interested in this newsletter or any other newsletter, you can go to cilium.com newsletter, and that will show you all of the previous newsletters that have come out, and you can also subscribe right here with this email box. That's how you get it. And then there's also an RSS feed that picks it up, which is pretty cool. Let's jump back into the news here. Pretty good write-up on Cilium network policies from first principles to production. Really trying to explain all the different constructs inside of Cilium network policy, jumping into like what's possible. Pretty good write-up, I think. Linux kernel fundamentals for effectively writing Tetragon tracing policies, pretty good one. A tour of eBPF in the Linux kernel, observability, security, and networking. Lots of good stuff in here. What is packet PWRU? This is a great tool, actually, because one of the challenges when you're writing, when you're manipulating network stuff with eBPF is understanding what's actually happening, Right? And so PWRU is a way of actually exposing that so that you can clearly see what's actually happening there, which I think is pretty cool. BPF meter, performance monitoring agent for eBPF programs. It's actually going to be, some of that work is actually related to things that we're doing on our side. So lots of work there happening to try and make all of this get put together pretty quickly. The eBPF Summit this year, it's a hackathon. So if you want to participate, I am going to be hosting this along with Liz Rice, and so that'll be exciting. It has information about how to join, what not to submit. The eBPF Summit Reinvented. So if you're interested in attending this year's eBPF Summit, definitely check this out. It's a great time usually, and we're really kind of focusing on just keeping it simple this year, keeping it pretty fun. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely check that out. Another really important one, in fact, I'm going to put this link into the chat. This is the Cilium user survey for 2025, and there's lots of great questions. It's only four pages. It's really not a ton of time invested here, but if you could take the time to fill this out, if you are using Cilium, that would be tremendous. I'm going to go ahead and put that link into the chat. So if you can follow that link and fill it out, it will be closing, I think, on the 23rd, which means we have about a week left to get this in. So hopefully that's something that you can fill out in contributing time. GKE network interface at 10, kind of talking about that 10-year reunion that we were talking about. eBPF talks at P99 Conf, and then a great co-located event deep dive talking about CiliumCon coming up in November in KubeCon, and what you're going to get out of it, what's new and different this year, what will the day look like, lots of really great stuff. Kind of giving you a great way to prepare for what's coming up at KubeCon in the Cilium co-located event. All right, next up, getting started with PWRU, hacking DNS port 53 with eBPF and XDP for remote Kubernetes access. Learn how to let multiple DNS resolvers share this default DNS port. I'm curious like what that is. I haven't dug in there, but that'll probably be pretty interesting. There's a training course on container and Kubernetes defense in Zurich in December, between the 9th and the 11th of December. That would be pretty cool. CiliumCon EU coming up. CFP is now open for Amsterdam. Deadline is November 2nd. That's great stuff in this particular news week. The next thing I want to do is take you over to the events page. If you go to isovalent.com/events, then you're going to be able to see all of the events that have happened or are happening. In fact, today it looks like my fellow CTO, fellow field CTO in Europe, Mr. Ray, is going to be hosting a coffee corner at TalosCon in Amsterdam. So you should hopefully get a chance to check that out. That's related to the Talos conference that's actually happening out there. It's funny, I find that there are a ton of conferences that happen in Amsterdam and right at the rise. So I think it's partially because it's just super easy to get to from pretty much anywhere else in the world, but I think that's great. It's also a really fun city just to explore. I actually got to go there earlier this year, and I spent a week there, and we did a lot of internal engineering meetings during that period of a week. But we also really got a chance to kind of explore parts of Amsterdam that I'd never had a chance to explore before, including, walking, we went and had this dinner at this place that was kind of out by the red light district, a little further out from the center of the city than the red light district. So you kind of had to walk through that to get to where we were going. And I passed, and I'm still amazed by this, I passed a store that had only rubber ducks to sell. The entire store, every shelf, on every wall, huge display in the front, all rubber ducks. I was like, I have never seen this in my life. I don't understand how a rubber duck store can maintain a storefront, but it was really amazing. And like the whole storefront part, like right in the front of the window, they had all of these rubber ducks that were kind of set up like those little those little Lego minifigs. So all different rubber ducks from all different industries. It was just, I was like, what is happening? It was so wacky. But Amsterdam is really a city full of wonder. And if you have a chance to explore it, I highly recommend doing so. It's pretty great. We also have Kubernetes Community Days coming up real soon on the 21st. It'll be in the UK. It should be really a lot of fun. That is happening in Edinburgh. Oh, wow. Nico will be hosting an event there at the Coffee Corner. So if you haven't had a chance to meet Nico, you should really do that. Nico is an absolutely incredible human and just a super lot of fun to hang out with. He's super knowledgeable, not just in this Kubernetes space with cloud native networking and all of that stuff, but across a variety of different domains, not just networking, but also in like traditional networking. So he worked at Cisco for many years, and now he's working there again as part of the acquisition with us. So super exciting there. A workshop on doing Kubernetes network policies the right way. Connect OpenShift to VMware and run VMs without disruption. This is a really interesting one, and it talks about some of the efforts that we're putting into around the isovalent network bridge, which is a way of simplifying the migration of workloads from Kubernetes to whatever your next hypervisor might be. At the moment, like we're pushing things like OpenShift and KubeVirt because it seems to be a pretty widely adopted solution for that, but there are others also on the roadmap. The isovalent runtime security with Splunk workshop is happening November 6th, and on November 9th, which is the Sunday of KubeCon week. So if you're coming in for rejects and you don't have anything planned on Sunday, the next day, then definitely come join me with the isovalent EB Quest, where we will have all of our labs available to you. You can go through all of the labs, get all of the stickers, have a wonderful time just hanging out with me and asking any questions that you have. It should be a real blast. And then KubeCon week starts, and we jump into KubeCon Cloud Native Con, where there's going to be a lot going on, including the HiveMind Mingle. If you haven't signed up for this, definitely go check it out. It's going to be a great time, as it is usually. But we're going to have a great spot in the Ventanas. It'll be from 7 to 11 p.m. on Wednesday. So definitely come check that out. It's always a great time, such a great party. It's always so good to see all of my friends out there for that. Okay, that is the news of the week and the events and everything else that's happening in the space. So let's jump into the fun stuff. Just closed a tab I did not mean to close. History. That one. Yeah, cool. So these are a bunch of VMs that are all usable by my particular hypervisor setup and my configuration. And I figured that we would use these to kind of explore some of the cool stuff in the task today. So let's jump into the task today and we'll explore what I mean by that. All right. So if you go to tetragon.io, it's a great website and it's focused specifically on Tetragon. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. Navigate over there successfully. All the way over, friend. There we go. Control V. So Tetragon.io is a website that is actually dedicated to Tetragon. To give you a quick overview, most of the time when I'm on these episodes, I'm talking about Cilium. Cilium is our open source networking security and observability platform for Kubernetes. And I said for Kubernetes for a reason, because Cilium operates on Kubernetes at the networking layer, right? It's part of the CNI solution for Kubernetes. And they can replace things like kubeproxy. You can handle the internal load balancing for Kubernetes. You can do all of that stuff. But today, I'm talking about the other product of the suite, which is called Tetragon. And in the enterprise side of things, we call this isovalent runtime security. But Tetragon, so if Cilium is primarily a networking product, Tetragon is a Linux kernel product, meaning that everything that you can do in the Linux kernel, every way that you can monitor or understand contextually what's happening from the perspective of the Linux kernel, can be done with Tetragon. And basically, Tetragon is like a framework for generating these eBPF programs and injecting them into the Linux kernel on your behalf. Tetragon does not have the requirement that there is a Kubernetes. That doesn't mean you can't run it there. There is a Helm chart for Tetragon, and we can actually play it deploying this. But fundamentally, Tetragon doesn't have a requirement that Kubernetes exists because it can actually read policies directly from disk. And there are lots of different ways to automate that particular functionality to make it easier to define policies that you want to enforce, or even policies that you would use to observe what's happening inside of a Linux server on a server without actually taking Kubernetes into account at all. And today, in the episode, we're going to be exploring the different ways that you can install Tetragon on Linux servers. And that's why I had this list up here. This list is a bunch of VMs that I could use in Vagrant to actually spin up a VM and kind of show you how that might work, or how that might look. So that's what we're doing today. So let's kick over to the documentation. There's lots of great stuff in here. If we go to the installation and configuration section, this is where we're going to spend a good amount of our time today, because I think it's going to be pretty interesting. Clearly, we can do this on Kubernetes, and let's go ahead and just do that real quick, and then I'll show you what is possible, the art of the possible from that perspective, and then we'll jump into the Linux server side as well. Or do you think we should just do the Linux server side? Is there anybody in my audience? Is there anybody watching this live today? You get to decide if you're out there. Do the Kubernetes side first, or skip it and just do the server side. I'll probably skip it and do the server side. Let's do the server side. All right, so I'm going to make this a little smaller. I'm going to grab an image. Let's say, I'm actually kind of curious. So let's grab the Ubuntu 2404 image here. Here, 2404. Vagrant init. Grab our image. And working at a networking company is super nice. It's probably a pretty good size image, and I'm getting it in about a minute, so that's not bad at all. Other things that have happened this week, skip the case, good time. So other things that have happened this week is that yesterday I was hosting an event in Mountain View. It went from about 12:30 until about 4:30, and in that event we were doing an exploration of hands-on labs for isolated load balancer technology, and also the integration of Splunk and isolated runtime enterprise. So that was a great session. We had lots of really good questions. I got to meet a few other folks in the industry that were curious about our technology and what's happening in that space. And I'll be doing that again in December. So on December 3rd, I plan on being in New York and hosting a very similar thing. I've been kind of playing with whether to do this in the evening or in the afternoon. I think it's kind of useful to target an audience in the afternoon that might use this for work. But at the same time, I don't want to limit myself only to those people who are leveraging this technology for work. I want to kind of make it a wider solution. So we'll see if that'll actually work out. I might do it later in the afternoon. I'm not sure yet. Right, our Vagrant box is almost up. Vagrant SSH. So here we are. We are running the Ubuntu kernel. We're running this in a VM. If I do sudo apt update, we'll just get it all the way up. Just get it all the way patched up here, and then we'll play with the docs. The first one we're going to explore is the container one. Well, that's not bad. Only 15 packages behind. We'll skip that for now. Let's do Perl. Get stuff Docker. This is going to do, so there's a great script. I'm actually a huge fan of it at get.docker.io that will install Docker for you. And it'll use the version of Docker that is available that Docker ships. It'll add the repository, add the key rings, do all of that stuff. You don't actually have to do any of that manually. This is a trick I learned many years ago in the exploration of Kubernetes and container runtimes and all of that stuff, and it's been really great. It's been a very handy trick to know. So that's now done. So now we'll just do sudo g password -a vagrant Docker, and then we will do sudo apt upgrade, catch the rest of the stuff, which is all just Python libraries. It's almost completely up to date. That's actually pretty sweet. And then we'll just give it a reboot. Interesting. Yeah, doesn't really matter. Let's just do a reboot anyway. Wow, that rebooted quickly. Woohoo! All right. So now we have Docker PS. We have Docker running. Bash. You have Docker stuff. So quick, so clean. So now let's go ahead and do this install and see what this looks like. So if we're looking for the unstable development versions, we can actually grab the latest from Quay using this Tetragon CI tag. But let's go ahead and just do an install of 1.5. We'll look at this command. Copy, paste this in here. Except that for some reason. There we go. So this Docker run command, it says, I want the Docker container that gets created to be called Tetragon. So if you're doing like Docker exec or any of those things, the name of the container will be Tetragon. It won't use a random name. It will remove the container when it stops, and it will leave the container running while it's while it is running. So even though it's like running in the background, it'll stay detached. That's what -d is, detach. I'm giving it the PID file system of the host. I'm giving it the network file system of the host, and I'm making it a privileged container, which means that effectively from a capability perspective, it is running as root, right? So with access to the PID file system and the cgroupNS file system and running as privileged, this means it has almost all of the namespaces, or it has access to all the namespaces of the underlying host. It'll still get its own network namespace, but the cgroup and the PID namespace will be shared. Then we do a mount. What do we mount? We mount sys kernel BTF of VM Linux, and we mount that to varlin Tetragon BTF. And what this is doing is it's making it so that when Tetragon builds these eBPF programs and injects them into Linux kernel, it can leverage that BTF data to understand what functions map to what integers in the Linux kernel API. So we'll explore that a bit more as we go. So let's go ahead and get this started. Looks like the image wasn't available because we just installed Docker. Do a little download. We do a little downloading. We got our container started. So now if I do Docker PS, I can see that it's running. If I do Docker logs, and then look for the Tetragon, you can see what's happening here. So this is the startup of Docker, or sorry, of the Docker-based Tetragon. It's like cgroup support for C group V2 has been detected successfully. Looks like it found the metadata. The kernel version is 6.14.11. That makes sense because that's our kernel version here. Everything looks pretty happy from this perspective. All right, so it looks like we got everything. Oh, look at that. That's interesting. LSM false. Boom, boom, boom. And this is something I actually really wanted to cover in this discussion. So one of the ways that Tetragon can do enforcement is by leveraging features of the security module for LSM. And it turns out that it's not available everywhere. Happy resources. And one way to determine what version you have or what versions, what modules for security are available to you is to use this command. So I'll just do favorite SSH again. And then so you can see, oh, those Linux security modules that are currently enabled are lockdown capability, landlock, YAML, AppArmor, IMA, and EVM, but it does not include the Linux security module for BPF. So the BPF enabled Linux security module is not in there. And the BPF one actually just enables us to do this with Tetragon directly. We can configure the Linux security module and make use of features of that capability. But as we can see from the output here, that's not in there. And if we wanted to change it, if we wanted to add it, then we could also do that just by basically adding it to the grub command line and including the entire existing list, and then appending the other one, the new one, the BPF one. But we're not going to worry about that for now. But it's just an interesting thing to watch out for. And it also speaks to the fact that, like right now, I'm looking at 24.04 as a version of Ubuntu. I'm curious, and we're going to find out before the end of this episode, if the next version, 25, will actually support BPF as an LSM or Linux security module. So let's check that out as we go forward. All right, so from the configuration perspective, it looks like we can append Tetragon controlling settings at the end of the command. So for example, as an example, set where to export the JSON events with -- export file name. That's a different command that we could run. We can also set the environment variables that way. And then configuration files mounted as volumes. So this is where we can actually specify the volumes where the configuration might be kept. But at the moment, it's just operating inside of the Docker container. So if I do Docker, I'm not actually even sure there is a shell in there, but let's find out. Oh, there is. Okay. There's no configuration there at the moment. And inside the container, I can do Tetragon events. That should go short. Compact, I mean. Let's see if we see anything here. SSH. There we go. That's our connecting back in. We can see all of the events happening in the underlying host. We can see processes starting and stopping. You can see, the things you'd expect, right, happening kind of in the background. There's our SSH. If I were to do cat etsy password, right? Oh, well, I can see the process interacting with cat and etsy password, etc. So pretty cool stuff. And if I do curl google.com, what happens there? See the command to go to the process. And so basically all this is turned on at the moment is like process level stuff. There's a ton of other configuration options for Tetragon that turn on a lot more features, but at the moment, out of the box, without changing anything, all we're watching for is processes itself. Because we're seeing the process execs and we're seeing the other commands and stuff. All right. So that's the Docker install. Now there's some challenges with the Docker install, right? Like obviously the way we have it set up at the moment, if I were to do Docker stop Tetragon, it would delete it. It's gone. Docker ps notice a. It's exited and been deleted because we actually recommended --rm after the creation of it. So the image is still there though. It's still there. Now let's look at some of the more persistent ways to install Tetragon. This would be a great way to explore it if all you want to do is play with it. If all you wanted to do was just like see how to get it installed, this is a way to do it. Especially if you are running on a Docker host. But what if you're not, right? Let's take a look at what that might look like. So let's go ahead and grab our target release. So that one. We're going to grab 150 from the releases here. And we'll do tar minus xvzf Tetragon. Bunch of data in there. And we go into the Tetragon directory. We look at the install command. And what this is going to do, it's going to figure out what directory we're in. It's going to copy user local lib Tetragon system target Tetragon service into systemd's Tetragon service model. It's going to do an install of the directory of etsy Tetragon confd, and then the same for tp.d. And then it's going to copy the content of user local lib Tetragon confd to etsy Tetragon. Does a reload, does an enable, does a start, and then it tells you what it is. So let's go ahead and run that. Let's do sudo -install. Go. So now we can see basically what's been installed, right? We said we threw Tetra into the user local bin directory. We threw Tetragon into the user local bin directory, and then there's a library, Tetragon lib, into the lib directory. Then we put BPF into the lib directory, and then we put a bunch of these object files in there to be used by the eBPF programs that we create when we enable particular features of Tetragon. But you can see that there are no Docker containers running. And that's because in this model, when we do the package install, we're actually just using the binary directly under the underlying host. There's no expectation or requirement that the configuration be running inside of a container. Right? This is just now running as a systemd unit. If I were to do kernel kettle minus FLU Tetragon, I would see a very similar. You're currently not seeing messages from other users. Oh, there we go. So it looks like a very similar startup, right? It has all the same stuff that we saw before. It found the BTF metadata, but this time it found it basically where it sits on disk, which is at syskernel BTF VM Linux. It again loaded the same kernel version. Everything was great there. We also see that the SC Linux is unconfined, AppArmor is unconfined, lockdown none. We see the let's see everything else running here as expected. Let's see listing for events. If I were to do cat etsy Tetragon, name. You can see that we're creating a file at var log tetragon log. If I do tail -f, I'm able to hit the minus arg var log tetragon log. There are those are the JSON events for everything. If I do Tetragon get events, just like I did before, eCHO compact. And then we split our terminal, split it vertically, make this a little bigger so you guys can see. Okay, so then I could just jump back in there again, vagrant SSH. Bunch of stuff goes by. Cat, let's see, password. Right, you can see at that layer what's actually happening. Which is pretty cool. And this is a much more persistent way of doing it, right? If you do this install in this method, it becomes much more persistent because it's running as a systemd unit, and it will just it'll survive through reboots, all of that stuff. It makes a lot more sense. So let's just, we could actually show that if you're curious about it, but if I do system subkettle status, we can see that it is active. We can see that it is enabled, and the preset is enabled. So in the chance of a reboot, sudo reboot, because it boots up so fast. There we go. Uptime, just a little under a minute. And we'll do journal cal minus LU Tetragon. Do the root. You can see our startup. Now, in the persistent way of installing it, as was mentioned before, there's a bunch of stuff happening inside of this directory. So there's a bunch of things touched in here that actually describe how to interact with stuff, right? So the BPF lib, that's telling us that it's currently in user local lib tetragon BPF, and if I were to do a directory search of that, let's just do find user local lib tetragon BPF. These are the things, the object files that have been created. And then other stuff that's in here, log level, could be changed. It's currently set to info, cat verbose, probably false, cat server address. This is where the socket is running. So when I'm running that tetra command, right, you can see the health status is healthy. All that's there in that directory. And this is also where we can put configuration that we want to run, right? So actually, let's take a look at the metric server. This is the metric server enabled. It's not. So that's another one of those things that we could actually turn on and play with. So minimize this window again. That's one way that we handle the installation of Tetragon OSS. Then from the configuration or upgrade model, it's the same. It would just be, like if you wanted to remove it and you want to grab the new one and overwrite it, that's how you would go about it. There's also an uninstall script that will do basically all the things that you would expect it, including all of the steps necessary to actually wipe it out. There is gRPC access, as we mentioned before. So if we just do tetra, it'll expect the path to be what's configured, and then we can kind of interact with all of that stuff. And then we can jump into exploring security observability events and all of that. Okay. We also signed these builds, so if you wanted to validate the installation, you can. It's pretty cool. That's validating the container images. And then we can kind of get into a way of configuring Tetragon. So there's up at the top, there's 3 different ways to do it. Oh, itchy eye. All right, there's 3 different ways to do it. You can do it with Kubernetes, you can do it with Docker, you can do it with systemd. I'm using systemd on this host right now, so let's just explore that one. So we can change the configuration in etc Tetragon and restart the systemd unit as a privileged user, write the file, etc Tetragon export file, change it to a path, which we've already got. We don't want to change that one. But let's go ahead and enable process events, right? So we could do sudo echo true. See Tetragon conf, and then the directory we want to enable is process cred. So the file that we want to put that true inside of. And what that does is it configures your Tetragon to understand that we want to enable process credentials. Right? So let's go ahead and do sudo systemctl restart Tetragon. We'll do sudo journal kill le Tetragon. And then we see enable process credential true, right? There's a process manager starting up. We can see enable process credential true. And if I watch for if I do that same search and I do a grep for okay. Right? And previously it was set to false. So the first 2 times I restarted the process, it was set to false. So now if I do tetraget events, compact, I split myself horizontally again. We're going to see a little more data, including this stuff here, which says, what is the effective permission of that process? Capsysadmin, which is a lot of permission, right? Because I'm actually running in the underlying host, and I have, because of that process level, I have that level of access. If I do sudo dash, capsysadmin, but all of that stuff was not there previously. Like if I go back up and look at some of the previous logs, I think I have, yeah, so you can see none of those things, none of those process credentials are present. All right. Pretty cool how that works. What else do we want to configure? Let's take a look. Is this one time? Let's jump into concepts, policy library. There's a library of policies that are available to us. Let's go to use case mention. That's what we're looking for. All right, so then let's turn on network observability. So all of this is available to you as well in in that tetragon.io website. It's a little bit bigger, a little smaller. Okay, so what we're going to do, we want to view TCP Connect events, apply the TCP Connect tracing policy. think yeah, so we can see privileged execution, we see file name access. All of these things are available to us, including monitoring the mounting of Linux modules, security profiles, record Linux capabilities changes, which is pretty cool because then we can actually see if someone has done an escalation of privilege within the process, whether that escalation of privilege has to do with running inside of a container or not. And there's a reference guide, etc. Tetragon. All right, that is how we can handle the installation of it. This does actually get into some of the more interesting stuff around some of the challenges of configuring Tetragon. For the most part, we didn't run into them here, but I did want to talk about them real quick. Just kind of discuss the challenges of running Tetragon, regardless of whether it's running inside of a Kubernetes cluster or whether it's running inside of a Linux server. And then after we're done with that, we're going to try running that same command, that same install, like maybe the Docker install, on a more recent version of Ubuntu and see what we see from the LSM perspective. So, where was I at? I was saying one of the challenges is what minimum Linux version is used to run Tetragon, right? So currently it's anything after 4.19 or greater. And I want to kind of dig into this a little bit that talks about BPF support, because I think that's actually a pretty interesting one, and how it works and what the work involved in supporting BPF data is, right? So like on my underlying laptop, this is kind of, or actually even inside of this VM, sys kernel BPF data. So this is all the BPF data made available to me on this host, right? And this is a change in the way that Ubuntu actually compiles its kernels. Interestingly, though, prior to this, none of this data would be here. This whole directory, kernel BTF, would not be shipped as part of the kernel package, but now it is. And this is here because if you think about the Linux kernel as an event-driven API, right? I want to open a file, I want to open a socket, I want to do anything like that. Well, in BPF enables us to instrument any of those calls, right? So if somebody makes a new socket call or makes a new file call, we can instrument that call. We can understand, hey, this file was opened inside of the container namespace, or it was opened inside of the underlying host that somebody mounted into the container namespace. There's a lot of control there's a lot of context that eBPF can give us because it's looking at it from the perspective of the Linux kernel. But for us to actually build that eBPF program in a way that is portable, we need to have some stuff we need to have a way of mapping the integer for a given function to a function name. So that when you're writing your eBPF code, you can say, I want to watch for this system call of, symlink at, or file open, or open at, sorry. Like, these different system calls that actually could be watched for or hooked into so that we can understand, hey, a file has been opened, and I want to know all of the context associated with that file open. Well, it's not actually showing up at the Linux kernel in the form of a system call by name. It's showing up at the Linux kernel as a system call by number, right? And so we need to figure out what that number is, that mapping. And so this is one way of actually getting that data is by leveraging BTF data that's packaged with the Linux kernel. It's important that it's packaged with the Linux kernel because it changes over time, right? So even if somebody might add a new system call, or they might extend an existing system call, and that might knock the order out, different versions of the Linux kernel will have different system calls in there, and the same thing for different platform types. So Intel versus ARM, for example, will have different system calls in different orders. They might have might have the same system call by name, but a different system call by number. So if you're curious about how that all works, there's a great little write-up here talking about what is the Linux kernel configuration options needed to run Tetragon. This is what it looks like. You can also do tetra probe. Wait, what was that? Sudo tetra probe. And that will show you what capabilities are there, right? So we can see LSM is false, like we talked about before. You can see that there's a bunch of other things in here that are true. Can I run it as standalone? Yes. Can Tetragon run on Mac computers? Yes. You can run Tetragon locally by running a Linux virtual machine on your Mac, like if you're running the Docker container or Lima or VirtualBox. Right. I think we understand everything I wanted to show from that perspective. Oh, that's right. We're going to do this one more thing. So let's do that. Let's exit out of this guy. Vagrant exits. Our vagrant destroy. Just delete this VM. Yes, I'm ready to distribute. We're going to grab 2504. Here, 24, C24, vagrant, init, box name, vagrant. So this is going to be grabbing the 2504 distribution of Ubuntu, and then we'll take a look at what's happening inside of it. Ubuntu obviously is not the only distribution, but I think that with these tools, you'll be able to see what if it would work for your distribution. Right? You don't actually need, I'm just using this example as a way of validating it. In fact, I think they have other things in the stack. We could try RHEL 9, for example. Maybe we'll do that. That'll be fun. 24 seconds left. Beautiful day here in the Bay Area today. Got a soft edge over here. There's some kind of event happening down here. I'm sure like a concert or something. That's good. All right. Vagrant. Uname dashing. So still running 614, I guess. Cat SC LSB release. 2504. Plucky Puffin. Cat sys kernel security LSM. See, BPF is not in there. That's what I was curious about. What if we do vagrant destroy? Yes. And then let's grab RHEL 9 here. Let's see what that has to say for itself. I'm super curious. So big. Dear RHEL 9. Oh. Again, just a little under a minute, pretty fast, or about a minute, I should say. Let's see what RHEL 9 has to say for itself. If, by the way, you're distro hopping, or if you're looking to actually just interact with a particular distro, I cannot say enough about Vagrant. I've been using it for, I think, probably going on 30 years now, 20 years, something like that. It's always been just a super handy tool to interact with. I'm just taking a look at Tetragon. How much memory is it using in your system? That's a great question, and there are metrics that describe it, right? So if you turn on the metrics in the use case section, let me jump back over here. So inside of here, this was a question actually. So the question was, I'm taking a look at Tetragon, how much memory is it using in your system? So there's a couple different ways, there's a couple different considerations about how much memory it's using. One is that in eBPF, if we're going to gather context at the Linux kernel layer, we need somewhere to put that context before we can bring it down to user space and make it available as events that we see on disk. So we use ring buffers for that, right? Typically speaking, we'll use ring buffers to hold that data, and then in the user space side of things, the Tetragon agent will actually pull that data from the ring buffer and put it into a structured JSON file on disk, and that's actually how all of that will work. So, but if you're curious about how much memory is actually being used, if we go into the policy library, sorry, maybe it's the use cases. Metrics. Tetragon health metrics. So this example here actually describes how you might configure the metrics for the binary itself. Right? So if you want to enable, excuse me, the Prometheus, you want to enable Prometheus and verify that metrics are exposed, and that's how you can actually get that done. Right? If you're using systemd, you can create the metrics address entry in a file under the etc tetragon.conf directory. Right. Maybe we'll just do that here. Let's see. Vagrant SSH. First, let's answer my question because I'm super curious. So we sys kernel security LSM. And it said, hey, so it looks like in this case, rel 9 absolutely does enable it, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's go ahead and do curl -l s. Actually, you know what? Let's just do it with the package instead. So installation package. Grab that command there. We'll drop it in here. We'll do tar -xvzf Tetragon sudo install sudo bash install. And then we'll do journal kettle lu Tetragon. Make this bigger so you can see it. You can see the startup. All right, it's up and running. We saw the metadata in this Red Hat kernel located in the same place that we were expecting to see it there. KPro LSM true, which is different than what we saw before, which is pretty cool. All right, so we got all that working. So now let's take a look at, let's see, Tetragon you can see that the metric server is an empty file. And what it's telling me to do is set the metrics address entry under the, you can enable them by setting the metrics server address of the Tetragon agent to, for example, :202 or with the command line flag -- metrics server. So what I'm going to do is sudo -e metrics server, enter, and we're going to put this in 2.12. So put it into systemctl. Restart Tetragon. Go kernel command again. Starting metric server on port 212, so we curl localhost 212 metrics. And we can see the metrics that are exposed. And inside of there, if we do, I think it's for, we can see how much memory is in use across a variety of different categories. Now, obviously, this could all be thrown into Prometheus. I'm just showing you that the metrics exist and that you can enable this. There's a much better way to go about getting this data than gripping the metrics endpoint, but it does enable it. There are graphs that you can use to interact with that data. So, pretty cool stuff. All right, I think that was everything I wanted to show you today. So I hope that this was useful for you, and I hope that if you have any questions, you'll reach out. Remember, as always, that if you go to the Tetragon website, that's tetragon.io. If you want to chat with us in the community, you just go to the community section, and there's a link to the Slack that is hosted by the community itself, not Cilium in specific, but it is the Cilium Slack. It's the Cilium open source public Slack, and you can also interact with eBPF there as well. So, yeah, pretty good stuff. Hope that was useful. I look forward into the next episode. There's a bunch more stuff I really want to cover coming up. I hope that, everything here was really useful, and I hope you have, as usual, the best weekend of your life, because it's going to be such a great weekend. And if you are coming to KubeCon and you want to come join us at the community party or at the community day or anything else like that, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Slack, in a variety of different ways. And, ask me about it, and I'll tell you all about it. And I may even have a community pass. If you want to come join us, that would definitely help. It's great to see you all, and I hope to see you next time. And have a great weekend.